Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of the best artillery options available for the United States at the moment in Broken Arrow. Now I want people to keep in mind as they're watching this video that they've made a fairly substantial change with regards to infantry. We'll see if that does affect the meta, because right now the meta is certainly dominated by support or attack helicopters flying very low to avoid getting hit by everything and just dueling with shore adds. Not exactly how you'd want to use our attack helicopters in real life, or vehicles. And that does have an impact on how things play out. If infantry does become the meta, if they do make more infantry changes beyond the ones that they've released already, that might change the meta with regards to what kind of artillery you want to use. So just keep that aspect in mind. With that said, one of the artillery options that's not going to be on the list is the Himars. I know it's very popular, but you gotta understand what the Himars is in real life. It's basically a pod from the M270 put on a single vehicle. So one of these pods on a vehicle, you can see it very clearly, so one of these pods right here. And what that means basically is the M270 is much better than the Himars because it has more firepower. Now in real life, there's various reasons why the Himar works, more flexibility, spreading out your artillery, etc. But that's not reflected in the game because the cost of a Himars is very similar to an M270. So it's not going to make the list. So anyway, at number 5, we have the Stryker self-propelled howitzer. This vehicle doesn't really exist in real life. It was a prototype, but it hasn't been adopted in any way, shape, or form. There's probably just a handful of vehicles like 3, 4, something along those lines in real life, and they are not being used in war. So this is more of a demonstration rather than something practical. And by the way, one of the things that's really missing for the Americans is towed artillery, because America does have a lot of towed artillery in real life. They have Himars, they have M270s, they have probably around 2,000 self-propelled guns, so Paladins, but they also have a lot of towed artillery. And that's one thing that we don't see right here in the game. Well, the actual guns that America uses, the tubes themselves, are in the game, but not how they're used in real life, because America in real life does focus on getting things to the battlefield quickly, having it easier to transport over long distances. That's the reason they use towed artillery as opposed to more self-propelled guns. But anyway, the value proposition of the Stryker self-propelled howitzer is that even though it's only a 105mm gun on it, it does have certain advantages if you want to use it. Like you can put the trophy APS on an artillery piece if you want to and just deal with enemy missiles, though may not necessarily be worth it. But the real value proposition here is that it's reasonably fast as a vehicle, and it does have quite a bit of ammunition. It's really that kind of ammunition that really makes this vehicle worth it. The damage capability on it is not going to be as good as some other artillery pieces, but the mobility combined with the amount of ammunition does make it worth it in some way, shape, or form. Though, to be honest, there's a reason why this is at the bottom of this list. Then we have the Hawkeye MWS. This is another prototype, though at least some of these have actually been fielded, if you will, not just made as prototypes. Though it's probably a dozen at most, maybe even as low as 4. So what you have here is a Humvee with a 105mm gun. It has less ammunition, but it has higher speed than a Stryker. On top of that, it's smaller than a Stryker, so it does have some kind of protection just because of its smaller size over there. Obviously, it doesn't have the same kind of durability, but I would dare say that the smaller size in itself is a level of protection. It's faster, it's roughly the same vehicle, except it's lightweight. And thus, you can transport it and other things in a way that you wouldn't be able to with the Stryker. So, not something to be ignored over there with regards to it. And you do have different types of ammunition, cluster rounds, high explosive rounds, all those kind of things available over there. Doesn't have as much range, but it is cheap. That's a pretty big deal. So both the Stryker and the Hawkeye are very, very cheap artillery pieces. Not the best gun in the world, sure, but having mass in artillery duels in particular can be very, very useful, especially if you're going to risk something closer to the front line to be able to fire it, and you're going to have to do that with the Hawkeye. Then, at number 3, we have the Brutus. Now, this is America also being ridiculous. I don't even know if this thing exists in real life, to be honest with you. I mean, I looked up the Stryker, looked up the Hawkeye, not sure about the Brutus. But anyway, here's what we have with the Brutus. It's the same concept as the Hawkeye, except it's the truck as opposed to a Humvee. And it's a 105 Excalibur artillery piece. Only America would put an artillery piece on a truck like this. Okay, plenty of countries do it, though they use a bit of a different truck. Regardless, you can get up armored if you want to. I would not bother with that personally. Like, if this thing gets detected, it's dead. But it's still a fairly cheap artillery piece. Only a bit more expensive than the Stryker. And it's only more expensive than the Stryker if you're using the best ammunition on it. Otherwise, it's actually cheaper than the Stryker, and that's something to keep in mind, because this thing has a lot of firepower. Like, if you're playing with airborne infantry, you want to get this, because it's got a lot of killing power. In fact, if I could put 10 of these in a deck, I would put 10 of these in a deck. I'm not joking. They are that great. They're very powerful in terms of their damage. They're small, they're sneaky, they're not the fastest, to be sure, but damn, that cost really sells. Like, that cost for that level of firepower is ridiculously good. It's not the best artillery, it doesn't have the most amount of firepower, but it's really, really solid. At number 2, we get into the Armor Brigade situation. So the top 2 will be from the Armor Brigade. And I gotta mention something. While the Armor Brigade does have the best 2 of the best artillery available for the United States, you are losing out with Armor Brigade in a lot of other areas. So that's the cost you're going to be paying for these great artillery options. So personally, I would prefer using airborne infantry combined with maybe Strykers, or maybe not, though I would use the Stryker Cav Regiment for other reasons. Anyway, so with the Armor Brigade, here's what you get. You get the M270. So basically, the much better version in real life than the Himars. Well, basically, the Himars was meant to replace the M270, and then America was like, well, nah. Or just give it, or be a more lightweight version of the M270. Regardless, you don't have ATACMS on this. If we look at both of these versions, so there's 2 versions. One has ATACMS, one has PRSM ballistic missiles. So those are, as far as I know, better than ATACMS. You have a huge amount of range on these, good amount of killing power, and you're never going to use them. The reason you're never going to use them is because they'll be intercepted. So you're better off using cluster warheads or high explosive warheads, which can be guided. Well, let me tell you something that is ridiculously good when you're thinking about it. So if we compare, like, obviously, if you can suppress enemy air defenses and be able to launch ATACMS and PRSMs, that's a really good day for you. But realistically, against any kind of level of competency on the enemy team, they're going to intercept you. They're going to set up their air defenses in such a way that's going to be very difficult. Unless you have multiple of these vehicles all firing at once, and maybe you have air support, maybe you have a teammate or 2. Only then, I mean, it would be a great situation if you could. But regardless, this is much better than Himars, regardless of that. Whether or not you can suppress enemy air defenses or not, it is a really good vehicle. And that's the thing I gotta say about this. Like, you look at Himars, right? Regardless of the ammunition you're using, it is cheaper. But it's not so cheap that you want to throw away half the missile stocks that you have on it. It's obviously more difficult to supply it. But honestly, I would much rather pay the higher cost on this thing as opposed to getting a Himars. Different specializations, to be certain. Though with the Stryker Cav Regiment, I don't think the Stryker Cav Regiment is all that great in terms of artillery. It's great in other areas, don't get me wrong, but not necessarily in terms of artillery. And then at number 1, we have the M1299 howitzer, Iron Thunder howitzer, self-propelled howitzer. So you can put Paladin or you can put an Iron Thunder on this. Now, let me explain what the difference is between the 2 of them. Well, there isn't really much difference. It's just a lot of freaking killing power at a very, very long range with 105mm shells. Though, if we compare this with cluster rounds, like if we look at the kind of damage capability, right, the penetration power, because we do have penetration right there versus damage, Iron Thunder may have some of its own problems over there, to be sure. So there is a value proposition with regards to using the Paladin as opposed to just the Iron Thunder. To be sure, there are certainly some situations you might just want both, but from my perspective, if I had to choose between the two of them, and realistically, if you're going with Armor Brigade, you're going to have some limitations on how many of these things you can bring, right? I would personally pick the Iron Thunder. It's long range, it does a lot of damage, it has a decent amount of ammunition. Obviously not great speed or any of that, but just that range capability. It's one of the best tube artilleries in the game, and certainly the best tube artillery available for the Americans in the game. But that would be about it. You know, artillery is kind of lacking for America, I think, in some ways, compared to, say, Russia, but that's because America's way of fighting warfare is a bit different than fighting Russia on the subject. And also, yeah, they have a lot of towed artillery in real life. They don't have that in game. I understand that the Brutus and Hawkeye are supposed to represent that in game. It doesn't work like that, but still. You don't have the Iron Thunder. So, combination of Iron Thunder and M270s, really deadly combination. I'm not going to lie about that. Like, just Armor Brigade has a lot of great artillery options and support options in general. That would be all. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. Next up, I might just talk about the tank situation or vehicle situation. Bit complicated on that, because do you count IFVs? Do you not count IFVs? That's a bit of a discussion, I think. Stay tuned.